Chester, you mentioned about what's happened in some other countries, but wow, we're feeling this for the first time here. What are some of the lessons that I would put it out to all of you that we can learn that have been involved with implementations in other countries?
Yeah, so a couple of, I'll tell you my favorite story. When we first rolled out EMV in Europe, this was a 20-lane supermarket. At the end of the day, we had over 300 credit cards left over that consumers had forgotten about. So consumer behavior is going to change drastically. You're not going to be able to get out from underneath that. When you go into restaurants, they have to do a terminal at the restaurants to pay at the table. You have to have that integrated to your software or provide that dedicated functionality if you're going to go a dedicated terminal route. The other thing we saw in Europe, as I mentioned, is the market re-terminalized. The ISVs threw up their hands and they said, forget it, I don't want integrated payments any longer. So we put a lot of dedicated terminals out there. What we did over in Europe, we're in about 120 different countries around the world, but what we did in Europe is we acquired a company by the name of RSPA that came out with a de-scoped EMV solution, and we got a lot of software players on that. In the US, we just did an acquisition of a company by the name of SecureNet that has, I call it API 2.0. So it's a web-based payments API. You just go up to the website, you can integrate the payments, much like a Stripe or Braintree. But in addition to regular payment technology, it also does end-to-end encryption and tokenization automatically. And there's no breakpoints because it's from one company, one platform. What we're busy doing right now is adding card-present functionality to that for EMV, so you can just use that one API and integrate it. So that works out pretty well. What we saw happen in Canada, though, I find very, very interesting, because somebody was talking about this last night. In Canada, it wasn't that the banks were forcing people to go EMV, it was the consumer came in and demanded EMV from the retailer. Because what happened is the media got a hold of the story that EMV was more secure. Banks were selling the story that, hey, this protects you. So now all of a sudden consumers were saying, hey, I have this chip card, where do I use it? And that literally turned EMV on overnight in Canada. In Europe, it was a slow progression. In Canada, it was literally overnight. So a lot of people will say that, hey, Canada's had this for 5 years, they only have 51%, 50% penetration. But you have to be careful of what you're looking at. It's kind of the iPad versus the real system story. If you look at real retailers that are doing real business, that market's pretty saturated with EMV. When you count everyone as a whole, like those little square merchants, then all of a sudden, yeah, maybe it's 51%, but nobody cares about those guys anyways because they're not processing loan transactions, right?
Thank you. John, any other lessons? I know you guys have been involved with some other countries as well.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we did was, despite the complexity and the math helped us through here, one of the things that we did as a payment brand was really invest in tools to make this process easier, to cut into that 6-month process. So what we've done is we've invested in self-certification tools that probably the majority of folks up here on stage are using or are partnering with. And we wanted to make sure that we actually turn those on to our partners as well in a very cost-efficient way so we can do what we can to accelerate that process. And I would say secondly, we were working with EMV Co and some of the card migration, EMV migration forums and people like that to make sure that we don't take the eye off the ball with the risk of whack-a-mole, right? So if we move to card present, what else are we doing with regard to card not present? Because just, I think we told the story last time, there was a 50+% reduction in card present fraud after chip day in the UK, and there was a 50+% increase in card not present fraud, right? So I mean, you got to be cognizant of that. You've got to make sure that you have an integrated plan to make sure that you address both of those. And I think that's one of the lessons that we've taken to heart here and we're working on, and pretty much everybody up here has been working on deploying simultaneously. So those are a couple of things.
You mentioned tools. Matt, I know you shared an FAQ document that you're working on. Do you mind sharing some of the tools that you're hoping to put together or have available that we will be able to share to help the folks in this room?
Sure. Bantic rolled out an SDK toolkit well over a year ago, kind of the readiness tool for people that want to go into the direct serve. But Mercury's taken a real thought leadership approach. We've got blogs, we've got monthly webinars, we've got white papers, we've got user kits for our SDKs. So it's a real self-serve environment, as well as we got over 15 people on technical implementation team that do consulting. And I do believe we've actually got the largest staff of developers in the United States focused on EMV enablement. Currently we have several semi-integrated platforms, and I'm sure we'll talk a little about that later in the hour, but we specifically think the semi-integrated, specifically for card present, and both of these platforms are tested and proven, can really enable EMV and really move it forward. And And you'll continue to see Mercury and Banner really take a thought leadership approach to enable our partners and endpoints really understanding the difference in technologies.
Chester, anything else along those lines that you have available, you'll be providing to VARs to help?
Yeah, toolkit. So again, if you come up to securenet.com today, you can literally download the API and start coding today. The other thing I want to mention to you though is we are continuing to work with partners like DataCap. So for those of you that have integrations to DataCap, I would continue those conversations because DataCap is currently working on this. And I love Terry's approach, which is he wants to make it where it's only going to be 2-3 hours worth of development work on your part. So if you already have that integration in place, those guys should definitely rely on because they've been doing this for a long time.
Kelly, one just last thing to add is, the market's definitely hungry for this information. Mercury hosted an EMV call. We do it every single month in September. Out of a 10-year run at Mercury, we've been doing this. But we had our best participation ever on the EMV call. So clearly it's something that's misunderstood, but the market sees it coming quickly.